and then I would invite him to present his paper. Dimitris Zarkos is an associate professor of pedagogy of executive education at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. He has worked as a teacher, school principal, and school counselor in primary education. Dimitris' research aims to address the issue of social justice in education. Much of his work attempts to provide assistance to educators so that schools become more inclusive and democratic and capable of delivering the best outcomes for all children, especially those who need school the most. Children from different social class, gender, ethnic, national, cultural, religious, and linguistic backgrounds, as well as children of different sexual orientation. Dr. Zarkos has participated as a guest keynote speaker and as a chairman in many conferences in Greece and abroad. He has also published extensively in Greek and English language, 3 scholarly books, and more than 16 articles in scientific journals, conference proceedings, and chapters in edited volumes. I will now invite Professor Dimitris Zarkos to present his paper on the topic, why do we need an intercultural education for social justice today?
Hello.
You need to point down Is it turn on?
Switch the slides here.
Okay.
Here, this.
Yes. Okay. It works. Thank you. You did your magic. Nice to meet you here. I also want to say hello to persons who are attending our conference online. So, my theme. The long economic crisis to which the problems raised by the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine have added has had a decisive impact on social and political life in the economically developed countries of the Western societies. We refer to Western countries because they invoke human rights and individual freedoms. Taking advantage of this crisis, political organizations, parties, movements, and populist demagogues, most often but not solely belonging to the far or alternative right, cultivate and reinforce in a systematic way the phobias and prejudices of the people. Refugees and immigrants are the main target of this campaign. Far-right parties use social media, but they also have the support of many mass media in order to exacerbate the numbers of the intruders and magnify every negative episode in which others are involved, emphasizing the different national origins or religion of the perpetrators. Furthermore, they willingly spread unfounded rumors and fake news about the cultural characteristics of refugees and immigrants to dehumanize them. In this way, they contribute to the proliferation of negative stereotypes, prejudices, and feeling about the different individual or group. We underline that far-right and populist parties have also engaged in a struggle against people belonging to the LGBTQ+ community, ethnic minorities, and where appropriate, women and people with disabilities. More generally, they are positioned against all other people, as well as human and civic rights. The strategy of the long-term action of the far alternative right has been successful, as shown by the electoral results also on issues of social diversity, but also by the fact that they have managed to impose their agenda on the political scene of many Western countries. As a result, there is a rise in racism, classism, sexism, nativism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, anti-environmentalism, anti-intellectualism, irrationality, and the belief in conspiracy theories. At this point, we should emphasize that the whole situation becomes even more dangerous if we consider that during the last 20 years, there is a growing number of states across the globe that are moving away from the liberal democratic model and are governed in an authoritarian manner. The dangers now comes not only from the threat of nuclear war or of a nuclear accident, but also from climate change, the existence of which far-right parties and populist demagogues strongly deny. In our opinion, if humanity wants to reverse this course, collective actions by all those who understand the problem is essential. So does progressive leadership, as well as a systematic intervention of institutions such as public administration, criminal justice, and education. We stress that there is still time to take such initiatives, since rhetoric, but also political directions and actions of most Western countries, as well as the European Union, as well as mainstream political and scientific concepts like social inclusion or intercultural education, are aimed at a more diverse, inclusive, democratic, and ultimately to a better society. In the next part of our lecture, we will explore the role that education can play in the current circumstances, and more specifically, how intercultural education for social justice can encourage educational, social, and political actions which aims to reverse this disastrous course. Historical development of intercultural education. Historically, education was one of the ideological apparatus or mechanism that contributed to the dominance of the ideology of the bourgeois classes. Schools have provided and continue to provide a set of knowledge, attitudes, and skills that promotes the interests of the bourgeoisie by presenting its worldview as universal, economic and social inequalities as a natural order of things, and training children to respect social hierarchies. In addition, the school reinforces nationalism, economic and social inequalities, and present a monolithic national identity, helping to spread, propagate, and enforce national languages, religious myths, and symbols. By highlighting and projecting the experiences of and life performances of specific social groups, schools have refused to a certain extent, and to a certain extent continue to refuse, to treat other group of students in the same way. Thus, schools contribute to exclusion and school failure of the different student. This role of education caused the reaction of people who supported equality, academics, theorists, and educators who believe and fight for an open, democratic, and inclusive school. Their demand for equality among all people became more fertile after the Second World War and the lessons that humanity seemed to have learned from it. This period, a series of liberating movements took place all over the world that challenged colonialism, but also every other form of oppression and social hierarchies. It is in this context that multicultural education was formed in the United States of America during the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 1960s that i.e. that in the struggle for justice and equality for African Americans. Later, other minority groups of the USA population, national, ethnic, and cultural groups, were added to the interests of multicultural education, as well as inequalities related to social class, gender, religious, language, sexual orientation, abilities, disabilities, elderly students, and students from single-parent families. As a result, the term multicultural education became an umbrella under which many forms of social diversities are included. In Western Europe, multicultural education was developed first in the United Kingdom and later in countries such as the Netherlands, France, and Germany, having in its inception the aim of educational integration of refugees and immigrants. A decisive event in the development of this reformist educational movement in Europe was the adoption of its objective and principles by the European Union. Later, at the beginning of the new millennium, and after the terrorist attacks in New York and several European cities, various journalists and politicians accused multiculturalism of encouraging ethnic differences and interests at the expenses of national ones. To fill these gaps, theorists proposed to strengthen the concept of intercultural education, renouncing with a new term, cultural relativism, and setting as their main goal to break the isolation of minorities through interaction and communication between different groups. Our assessment is that the differences between multicultural and intercultural education are not great, at least not as great as the differences between the two approaches, within the two approaches. That is why we use the term as synonymous. We underline that what multicultural, intercultural, and anti-racist education have in common is that they try to obstruct the spread of hatred and discord among people. That is why they have been challenged by political forces and public figures who are pushing for an education oriented towards the preservation of economic and social hierarchies and injustices, nationalism, nativism, white supremacy, and racism. There is no commonly accepted definition of intercultural education. Its theorist defines it according to his or her political and philosophical position. A common element among those who advocate intercultural education is that they consider it to be related to changes that should be done to schools so that the needs of students are better met. Which categories of students are affected by these changes, and therefore intercultural education concern is a critical issue on which there are differences between those who support it. The way this question is answered is the basis of our analysis of intercultural education's dimensions. In the first category, we include those who argue that culture refers only to racial, national, and ethnic characteristics. In this category, we distinguish two subgroups. In the first one, we include those who believe that the integration of different children in school is an issue that concerns only these children and their families. The consequence of such an approach is that the interventions, actions, and activities proposed by its theorists are exclusively addressed to children from racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse groups. Therefore, teachers should be prepared to deal with the issue arising from their presence in schools and expect immigrant students to be different and pose challenges not problems. Intercultural interventions in this model is primarily concerned with enhancing the teaching of the language of the host country as a second language, as well as the students' cultural assimilation. The perception according to which intercultural education is only relevant to other students is strongly and vivid in the public imagination, as well as in the hearts and minds of many teachers and administrators. This perception is conservative, since it defends the preservation of existing structures, and monocultural, often giving culture a narrow, essentialistic interpretation according to which people are defined by their cultural characteristics. Finally, it is assimilationist, since those who support it believe that cultural homogeneity is necessary for the unity of the nation, and therefore different people should adapt individually to the new environment. In this way, group identities, which play an important role in shaping individual ones, are not taken into account. Among those who consider only racial, national, and ethnic differences to be cultural, there is a second group, members of which claim that the inclusion of ethnically, racially, or nationally different pupils in schools concern all students. And this because, firstly, from an ethical point of view, people are different but equally, and everyone's environment, stories and voices should be respected and recognized by the school and wider society. Secondly, in terms of everyday educational realities, schools should operate in a way that ensures harmonious coexistence and the best chances of success for all of its members. This approach is based on the belief of its proponent that the role of multiculturalism is to enhance the social diversity and promote good interpersonal activities among people of different cultural backgrounds. Children must respect all their classmates, regardless of the national, ethnic, or cultural group they belong to. Integration will succeed when members of the dominant group contribute to it. The others may do their best to adopt to their new environment, but the members of the dominant group must also accept it. Just as a person who cannot enter a house whose doors are closed, he or she cannot enter a group that does not want him or her. Thirdly, from economic perspective, all students should develop the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that will help them to adapt to the global economic environment. Multicultural skills are needed for managing diversity in the workforce, improving creativity and innovation in transnational corporations, and increasing global business performance. What is important for the achievement of the goals of this approach to intercultural education is to create such an environment in the classroom and in the school in which racially, ethnically, and culturally different students feel comfortable. To do this, schools and teachers need to make a series of interventions in the curriculum so that it includes elements from the cultural and social environment of all the students. With these additions, advocates expect that minority students will feel proud of their background, and students of the majority group will encounter the world of their minority classmates, which will help them to break down any stereotypes and prejudices they had about the latter. Furthermore, teachers in classrooms should use all the methods that can bring together students from minority groups with their classmates from the majority group. Examples are teamwork, restorative justice, drama games such as role-playing or mime, and on a more general level, the emphasis on the democratic functioning of the classroom. This approach to intercultural education is liberal, as it recognizes human rights and individual freedoms. Its implementation brings about some improvements for different students, as it promotes tolerance, appreciation of different cultures, and social diversities. This approach, however, focuses on changing perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors of individuals, and ignore the acute economic and social problems, as well as the unequal distribution of power created by social class and by the unequal status of members of different ethnic, national, or cultural groups. In addition, advocates of liberal intercultural education deny that there is, to a degree of concern, racism. We underline that this type of intercultural education that addresses only racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse students seems to be the most wise. In its implementation, it tends to mark an emphasis on teaching the official state language as a second language for minority children, as well as some additions about heroes, national and religious priests, and customs of different students in the curriculum. It also means school festivals, which emphasize food, music, and dances from around the world. We stress that even these limited changes may be introduced one year and abandoned the next, for example, because there are no different children in the school, or because the teacher who promoted them left the school, or because many parents complain. These fragmentary additions to the traditional curriculum and school life, however, do not help students to become aware of the roots of social variation, historical reality, and the contemporary political, social, and economic conditions. Traditional curricula, hidden curricula, and school practices create, in a probably large part of the student population, the belief that what they learn in school is beyond question, and that social hierarchies and inequalities are natural. In this way, in the traditional school, students are not trained to question, to make informed criticism, and to assert themselves. In the traditional school, students do not have the opportunity to understand the structures that lead to poverty and to acute economic and social inequalities. The same result is achieved by an intercultural education that does not challenge dominant ideas and leave children with a limited understanding of social reality. For example, if education or intercultural education do not deconstruct the concept of meritocracy, most students may believe that the exclusion of children of Roma origin from schools is due to their diversity and especially to their culture. So, they learn to ignore or overlook the social, cultural, political, and economic conditions that prevent those students from realizing their potential. In other words, students and tomorrow's citizens do not acquire the tools to understand the racism that people of Roma origin have been suffering, nor the many years that they have been living on the margins of society. A reality that led them to a dire financial situation and has greatly limited their opportunities for social advancement. A reality that led them to the very low esteem that members of other ethnic groups have for people of Roma origins. At this point, we should stress that despite their inadequacy, even those, in our opinion, incomplete, fragmented, and ineffective interventions and practices of intercultural education have been and are still being strongly questioned. as early as the 1990s, when efforts were made in the United States of America to make school curricula more multicultural, conservative theorists have argued that this reduces the emphasis on Western canon, i.e., the greatest work of Western culture. They also accused multicultural education of undermining children's ability to learn, write, and reason, as well as that it prevents the poor acquire an elaborated language code and succeed in school and in society. The above perceptions contradict well-established scientific positions, demonize the coexistence of students from different cultural backgrounds, and they start from an apparent or latent hierarchy of culture. In the year that followed, attacks on multicultural education and intercultural education increased. Multiculturalism has been accused that by recognizing and celebrating ethnic difference, it promotes and reinforces minority identities at the expense of nationalism. The issue related to intercultural education have had and still have a great impact on a non-specialist audience. And they are used by right-wing and conservative pundits, publicists, journalists, and politicians to win audience and votes. The famous war for culture and for history. These public figures have been successful in convincing people dissatisfied with the economic and political reality that different people are the cause of the suffering they face. This has resulted in hostile attitudes toward non-members of the dominant group, since perhaps a significant part of the population of economically developed Western countries believe that the emphasis on social differentiations and the corresponding educational policies that fund and promote programs for the poor, refugees and migrants deprive them and their offspring of economic resources as well as life opportunities. The conservative and liberal dimension of intercultural education have been and continue to be criticized by academics and educational practitioners who believe that intercultural education should be a means for educational and social change. According to them, the aim of intercultural education is to help address socioeconomic inequalities and power imbalances, as well as to combat racism and cultural domination. They also argue that intercultural education is addressed to all people and in every classroom, regardless of the pupils who attend them. Are they different or they're not? The changes intercultural education proposes concern all subjects and are not exhausted to a single lesson or a project of limited hours or days. We call this approach intercultural education for social justice. This approach supports the acceptance of all students' identities and backgrounds, challenging racism, discrimination and injustice, and seeks equality among all people. In more detail, intercultural education for social justice is a theoretical area, a set of educational policies and school practices that aims furthermore to the poor and different students to have the best teachers and are taught by the best teaching methods and means to create those conditions, safe and creative school classroom environment in which students, regardless of social class, gender, ethnic origin, culture, religion, language, and sexual orientation, can be empowered to reach their full potential. In addition, different students enjoy a challenging curriculum which, first, helps them not to passively accept social inequalities and injustices and to embrace the values of equality and social justice. Second, it commits them to addressing real and contentious social and political issues. Third, it exercises them to respect and cooperate with each other, as well with every human being, but also to live and succeed in a different society from their own. Fourth, it pushes them to operate with intercultural rigor and to develop the ability to question, analyze, synthesize, and think critically, so as to free themselves from the stereotypes and prejudices they may hold. Fifth, it teaches them to think and act in terms of what is right and not in their narrow own interests. Sixth, it encourages them to reassess their position and reconsider their action. Seventh, it trains them to make decisions about their future and to be willing to contribute to the creation of a better society. Intercultural education has become a popular catchphrase and an obsolete descriptor within educational settings. The fact that scholars have found ways to construe it as part of the dominant educational paradigm offers intercultural education influence and some recognition, at least in the Western countries. Furthermore, intercultural education has become a significant force for school reform over the past 4 decades, giving rise to new theories and research at all educational levels. This well-established position of intercultural education, both in educational theory and in everyday school life, indicates its usefulness in the struggle for a better education and a better society. As we have already mentioned, in recent years, especially since the financial crisis manifested itself with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, there are political forces that are strongly opposed to intercultural education and are pushing for a refolding of education so that it aims to consolidate economic and social inequalities, the entrenchment of the respective nation-state, its values and identities, as well as towards the exclusion of others and the devaluation of the democratic values. On the other hand, liberals argue that intercultural education helps to make nations' identity more inclusive. Anti-discrimination measures, affirmative action, and legal exceptions for minority groups help them to feel better and integrate into the national community. We believe that the contribution of the liberal dimension of intercultural education is valuable in the struggle for the rights and freedoms of oppressed and marginalized groups. Any partial victories, such as the recognition of the differences and the institutional registration of the rights of women, for example, or people with different sexual orientation, are indeed important. Important for moral and symbolic reasons, but also important for the lives of these people. Furthermore, these victories are important for the common good, since those empowered individuals, or some of them, can now, from a more favorable position, to show solidarity with the poor and the economically weaker and contribute to the struggle for a better society. However, our belief is that a society of equality and justice can only emerge when all economic and social inequalities, as well as the unequal distribution of power, are combated. The acute economic inequalities, the burning issue of racism, nationalism, sexism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and discrimination against people with different sexual orientation, show that intercultural education for social justice is now, more than ever before, necessary. Thank you.